We are ready. And go.
Well, that's a nice sound anyway. Well, thank you for inviting me to this session, and I'm very glad that this whole network was put up by you, and because I'm just sitting here as lonely as most of you in my apartment in Frankfurt, and I didn't have a chance to do a lot of performances recently. Actually, there was just one performance with more than 100 people in Frankfurt, which was nice, but they were really very, very far apart. So it was a bit strange anyway. Yeah, I'm a writer, a poet basically, and a sound poet sometimes. And I'm a little bit obsessed with repetition and with loops. So that's the kind of things I do. And I also do a lot of improvisation and collaboration with other artists. Might try that. And also, you may have noticed I was once posing the question about the poetry thing, and I know it's a question no one can ever answer. What is poetry? Why are we poets? Why are we calling ourselves poets? But still, it's a question that really bothers me, though it's always interesting to hear all the answers from people who cannot answer the whole thing. But it's still bothering me because I started out as a somehow real poet. And then I developed into something that other people would not name poetry, really. And so in the end, I really thought, okay, so maybe this is the good thing about being an artist. You can really define the things yourself. And if I say it's a poem, it's a poem. And I just need to find some people who believe me. And so the first thing I want to do is something which is, it's kind of a poem, but it doesn't have a sound. And it's actually a kind of a body poem, and we can do it together. And that's really the fun. Usually I tell everyone to close the eyes so you don't see what everyone else is doing. But because it's really silly. It's a very silly poem, but I hope you don't mind it. It's called Red Ears, or Rote Ohren in German, and it has some kind of instructions you can follow, and I hope you understand my instructions in English because it's originally in German, so I have to translate on the spot right now. So it really starts with sitting there and listening in the typical listening pose, which is like this. And you can move your fingers a little bit and squeeze your cheeks. Then you put your hand on your nose, just slightly, and go up and down a little bit, just slightly touching your nose. You can snuffle your nose a little bit to make some sound. And then you put one hand to your ear and start rubbing it slowly. Now you put the other hand to the other ear and rub it too. Then you can use both of your hands to rub both of your ears. I can't do it right now because I'm holding the microphone. And rub a little faster so they get really red and warm. And if your ears are really warm, you can put one hand to your mouth, take a deep breath with your nose, and then just breathe it away with like one breath. Wonderful. This is how it should be. And there's a funny story about this poem. The first idea I had, it was a very spontaneous idea when I was on stage, which sometimes happens when I'm on stage, that I have a completely new idea, doing something completely different than I planned to. And I was performing in India at Prakriti Festival. I don't know if you know about this festival in southern India, in Chennai. And the opening of this event was in an embassy. I don't know which kind of embassy it was, maybe the French embassy or some other embassy. And there were some really, really important people there, some generals and politicians and whatnots. And I just thought, let's have them do something really silly. And so that was the idea. And just tell them, this is my poem. This is the poem. And so that was the basic idea for about this. So I don't know how you feel about this. Is it a poem or is it not? What do you think?
It's kind of a preparation for a poem, I think. Like preparation
maybe,
to get into a new poem, maybe.
Also, I think I had in mind the Austrian poet H.C. Artmann, who said in the 1950s that poetry is just a gesture. It's in line with that kind of some variations on this kind of poem, because I think poem and body are really very close together to me. And so any kind of body movement can also be called a poem. Why not? Why not call it a poem? Yeah. See about performance because I can't go too noisy because I'm in my apartment and my neighbors are sleeping already. But just try a little bit something which is very repetitive, and partly it's called the number one poem number one, or Uno. And it actually, the first part of it was in Finnish. Maybe I should read it to you in Finnish, because some of you have heard it in English or Spanish, but I did it together, and it's kind of fun. And I just start with it, and it's called Yppö yksin. Yks, 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 yks. X X X X X X X X X X X X X X X X X X une X une X une X une X une X enden vein yks enden vein yks enden vein yks yksin vein yks yksin yks enden yks vein yks enden yks vex Yellow X. Yellow X. And then X, and then X, and then X, and then X, and then Canon, and then Canon, and then Canon, and then Canon, can X, can X, X can, X can, can X, can X, X can, X can, can X, sales, 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 Vielle X, Vielle X, Vielle X, Vielle X, Vein X, Ennen, Vein X, Enne, Vein X, Enne, Yxin, Yppö, Yxin. So does any one of you understand Finnish, by the way? Let me see. I have a translation of that. Just to I'll make it a little shorter than the original, so you can see. It's the English version. One, 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 one. 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 and 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 once and once only one and once only one and one only one alone only alone and once only one and one only one and still one and still one and still one and still one once once stone one Einstein and once one Einstein a one on one a1 come on one being one to be one is to be one being one is to be one and still one just one only one. And I combined it with another poem actually, which is a little bit newer, and it's called Compensation. So I just go on and one one assault only, another assault, and one more assault, and one more assault, and one more assault, and one more assault, please, one more assault, please, and one more assault, just one more, and just one more final assault, just one more final assault, just one more, seriously, and everything will be fine again. And I can finish it off with a little loop poem called The Next One, Please. And let's see if this works out. The next bit in German. The next one, please. So that's an example of my kind of loop poem. It's just one, please. And just the interesting thing about these loops is the more you layer on top of that loop, the more chaotic it actually gets. And because the loops are basically a structure, but if you use this structure too much, yeah, it gets really, really chaotic and spontaneous, and the machine will actually do things you never expect. So wonder about is the idea of phantom words that come in suddenly, and yeah, and suddenly you hear words maybe you have that I have never spoken, or the audience hears words that have never been spoken. So one of the phenomenons I really now I don't see all of you. Ah, yeah, now it's working again. And maybe just to finish off this little set, I would like to read you two pieces from or Antikörper in Germany, which is probably the ideal book right now in the Corona pandemia. And it's a cut-up text with texts from medical books, first aid books, and yeah, these kind of books. And I worked together with the Mainz artist Brandstifter, who did the collages that went along with the books. It looks like this. I can show you. So the collages are made by Brandstifter, and so it has it's hard to do it with one hand. So that's how it looks like. So on the one side, it's the English part, and the other one, it's the German part. And I'm just reading a little bit of that. It's also pretty nonsensical. And it was really fun to translate it. And I see, is Jörg here? And Peter, so they understand German. So maybe I read the German first and then the English translation. Wenn das Mindesthaltbarkeitsdatum des Wunders abgelaufen ist, müssen alle Verdachte schonungslos aufgeklärt werden. Die Wunden werden so lange geleckt und gekost, bis das Wunder wiederkehrt oder die Nekrose des Gekröses das Endstadium erreicht hat. And so the English would be, when the last quantum of wonder has gone, all dressings must be mercilessly stripped off. The wounds must be licked and kissed continuously to effect the return of wonder, or until the necrosis of the entrails has reached the terminal stage. And the interesting thing about this translation is I sent it to my friend from Wisconsin to translate, and then I saw the translation and actually liked what he did much more than my original. Of course, he misunderstood some of the ideas I had, but I liked the misunderstandings much more. And so in the end, there was some kind of a ping pong. I sent him some stuff and he translated something and I translated back to German and so forth. And so it took a little while, and in the end it became really, really strange. But I liked it that way, and I like this kind of translation games very much. And yeah, so that's one of the ideas. I just wonder where the other book went. Yeah, the last book I did was Repeating the Mistake. It's something I really like. To repeat the mistakes I made before, so I thought it would be a good title for book of poetry, and of course it's in German, but there's one very simple piece, and maybe I can read it to you. And of course it's called the Fehler wiederholen. Der Fehler wiederholen is to repeat the mistake. Den Fehlherr wiederholen, den Fehlherr wiederholen, den Fehler wiederholen, den Fehlherr wiederholen, den Fehler wiederholen, den Fehler wiederholen, den Fehler wiederholen, wiederholen, den Flair wiederholen, den Flair wiederholen, den Flair wiederholen, den Flair wieder Läufer wiederholen, den Läufer wiederholen, den Läufer wiederholen, den Helfer wiederholen, den Helfer wiederholen, dem Helfer widersprechen, wiederholen und dem Helfer widersprechen. So it's really a game with the word Fehler, mistake, and in the end it comes out that if you turn it around, you can get the helper out of it. So you have to get the helper again, but the helper will maybe not be your opinion, and so you have to contradict the helper. So that's the idea. Yeah, maybe we can just open a little bit for discussion. I have some videos, but I'm not quite sure if I should show them. I can put them in the links, I think. I did some work with a dancer, Mila Koistinen, who did some weird moves to that kind of loops, especially to the next bitte, the next one, please. And also there's this other project I have. I posted it with Brandstifter, the Fluxus artist from Mainz, Germany, which is really, really weird improvised sounds, improvised sounds. And this is something I really like in collaboration, to just be completely free without any idea what we do and just start and go. And so this is one of these kind of projects, and we both loop. We both use a loop pedal, and we use some instruments, but very cheap instruments usually, or toy instruments. And so the main thing is really the voice and some cheap noises in there. Yeah, maybe we should just open for discussion. So if you have any questions about, or any remarks about this kind of thing and these ideas, and yeah.
Thank you very much.
To hear what you think.
You can clap or put this image of.
You can rub your ear. I think you should rub your ear. Thank you. From somewhere.
Bravo, Dirk. Thank you.
I actually have an idea for improvisation, for collective improvisation in the end also, but maybe we should do it in the end.
Well, as I was saying, it was great, Dirk, to see a little selection of all your work. As you said, you combine sound poetry with machines, with the looper, or just your voice. You also make class, you make written poetry, and also you collaborate with a lot of artists. I mean, for a long time. So I'm very happy that we can have you here and know more about your work, and especially about your reflections about what you have been doing for a long time. I have some questions to start, but the first one, and then we can ask if they like. Just a technical one, because I know you have been using a pedal looper. If I'm not, I mean it's made for the guitars or the bass or other instruments. But what has been your relationship and the changes that have influenced your creation while using that effect, or maybe other effects or computers or softwares, or not, or I mean, in which way the use of the technology, also your knowledge of the technology, has been influencing your work.
Yeah, I think I started out with a very cheap sampling device. That was the first thing I had, and it just had a couple of buttons where you could put the sounds on, samples, and so I was using pre-recorded samples with my voice. And at that stage, I was actually working with a band, with a jazz band, and put in that samples, and it was fun, but of course a lot of limitation because it was pre-produced. And so it was not as spontaneous as I would really have it. But the funny thing is that the sampler itself inspired me to do something I called sample poetry, which was not done with a sampler, but it was imitating the sampler just with my voice.
Oh yeah.
And so there were a couple of pieces I did with that, and which is of course a lot more flexible, and it's also very repetitive, but it's still just the voice and the real voice. And so I was doing that for a while, and then the first loop pedal I had was a mono loop pedal by Boss, the Jam Man. So it was just a mono loop pedal, and which can do amazing things, but you just looping one track on the other. So it's yeah, you can go maybe one step back, but not too much really, or you can erase everything. And so I was doing that for a long time. I was using that, and I actually thought maybe it's just great because all these technology is developing so fast and is getting so perfect. Why not use mono in a stereo world as a signature for myself? So for a long time, I thought maybe, yeah, I'm a mono person. I'm just one person, a single person, single voice, so I should stay mono.
You should tell that to Martin, which is at least octophonic. He starts with octophonic and so on.
Yeah, he's several persons more than I am. I know that. I'm very simple. But of course, as time goes by, I experimented with other possibilities, and the monolooper became a little too restricted, and I was experimenting with the bigger loop pedal by Boss. They have these, I'm not quite sure about the numbers now. They have this big foot pedal where you have 3 tracks you can record parallel. And so that gives you a lot of possibilities. And the good thing about having separate tracks is that you can really create some kind of soundscape with that. And I really love that, this soundscape idea. And the pieces get really, really long sometimes. Like some pieces are like 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes long if I want. And it's just one piece, and it just develops very, very slowly, and fades out, fades in. And yeah, it's some kind of a soundscape, I would say. And now I'm also using a desktop looper with 5 tracks, so that gives even more possibilities. And I see that especially when I work with my friend Brandstifter, it's really great to have all these options. It's much more transparency in the sound than with the mono looper, and of course that's also something I really like.
Right. This might be too technical, but I was asking this because I know that lots of us in this group are very interested in repetition, and some of them use loopers just like you, or other use software and record clips, or use the looper of the software, etc. And I don't remember, but you also used some live effects or not? I remember some of your performance in YouTube. I'm not sure, like moving other parameters of the sound, or or just the looper? I mean, putting delays, reverb, or distortion.
Yeah. I'm using some effects sometimes. For some time, I was using an RFX effect.
Yeah, that's the one
Um,
I remember. It's really cool.
yeah, which you can change the parameters with your hand, just moving it on there. And so that's kind of fun because especially on stage, because it just looks funny.
Yeah.
And I like that. But nowadays I rather think I would use less effects, but use the basic loop function very much. I use effects, but very little. I try to use them very little. Just make it a little faster, a little slower sometimes, or change the pitch maybe a little bit, but don't use too many effects. And the other idea I have is just to create everything live. So there's no pre-produced sounds at all. Everything will be produced on stage or on the spot live. And yeah, so that's one of my ideas I still keep for a long time.
And the last question about the technical stuff, and then we can open to other things. But you mentioned the relationship with the spectators, which is something very tricky when you're using technology. Sometimes, I mean, some of us might be just moving the things in the computer, like we were checking our email, or others are like moving and using sensors or combining the movements of the body with the sounds, etc. How do you deal with that? Because I have the idea that at least some of your performances are very like theatrical, not just moving too much your body, but just with your face and the use of the voices, you get the idea of dialogues or theater in a little poem.
Yeah, it's actually very important for me to have a contact to the audience. And of course, this was a problem with the first device I had, the sampling device. And I really saw that it came in between me and the audience too much, because I really had to concentrate on what I was doing on that device. I was more concentrated on the device than on the audience. Yeah. And now with the foot pedal, especially with the foot pedal, it's really nice that you can be just free with your hands and gestures. And I wouldn't say it's theatrical at all. I'm not doing any theatrics. It's just being there with my body, with my voice, and contacting the audience also. And I actually talk with the audience also, and do some introductions, because I really love to perform for an audience that has no idea about avant-garde poetry. I performed in a place for retarded persons, for mentally ill persons. I'm performing at schools. I did a complete tour in India in schools and colleges, and it was a lot of fun to do that. And I always explained to them that that Dada was a very ancient German tradition. And it's in line with that tradition somehow, because if you tell Indians something comes from tradition, it's always a little bit better than to say I just invented it. And so audience connection is indeed very important, and I would say I would really love that everyone is able to understand what I'm doing. It's not difficult, you know. It's not very theoretical. It's not too much concept behind it. It's just having fun on stage and playing around a little bit and improvising. Of course, there's a little concept in the back, but it should be possible that everyone, school kids and old people, can understand it if they want.
Yeah, and
actually, when I was watching the videos that you sent, did I just jump in? Felipe wanted to say something.
That was the idea. Please.
But just a continuation with what you were saying, there was this performance or sonata that you did, and there was a child sitting there, and in your videos, and the camera would capture the child sometimes as you were just telling, you were performing. And it was very interesting because, in fact, watching that video, I think first I was kind of lost, but then I understood the narrative through that child, because she was first a bit confused and then completely got it. And the narrative would go up and down, and there was suspense and everything. And not only the child got it, then started to participate. So in the parts that were exciting, like she would go like this, and it was, I was feeling it was a poem, but it had some kind of maybe a detective theme into it. So I think I understood kind of, well, listening to it was very interesting to me, but then again, the interpretation of it through that child's reactions were very interesting to me.
Yeah, it does happen sometimes when children are around that they immediately react to it somehow. And as you say, in the first time they're a little bit confused. What is this now going on? And then they just go and move to it and feel it somehow. And if that happens, I'm really happy. That's the ideal
Could she talk? Did she have language? Because she notably had Down syndrome, but did she have
language? You mean that performance? Yeah, that was really one of the performances. It was actually an artist with Down syndrome. I was performing there in a place for people with Down syndrome and other mental and other issues. And but she's actually an artist. She's a very special person too. Yeah. And I knew her for a while, and but of course I didn't know how she would react to my my performance of the Ursonate. That was the Schwitters piece. And but I did this piece quite often, and it's always fascinating how people react. And I remember that I was reading Schwitter's own account of his first performances, and he said that the audience just didn't know how to react, and some were just very close to burst out into laughter, but didn't dare to do it. It's like because they were supposed to sit in a serious poetry reading, and others were really angry, and yeah, all these kind of things, all these emotions happen. And so it's an extremely powerful poem. Unfortunately, it's not written by myself, but it still works. In all respects, it can still provoke people. It can still make people happy, and it's a wonderful piece. I just love it still.
And in that relation with the people, do you notice some difference when you read like more textual poems, like with a language they can understand, or when it's just pure sound? Is it too different, the reaction of them, or they connect in different ways?
Yes, of course. The more you understand the language, you start to interpret. What is it? What does it really mean? And the fascinating thing with language is, or at least my experience is, me understanding the language does not mean you understand it. So you can have the same words, and people will understand completely different things, because it's not only the language, it's really the complete context people are using to interpret. And but of course, if they have a word or a sentence, it's something they can hold on to. They will try to create the meaning out of this, maybe. And people who do not understand the language, they just go for the feeling, of course. And I think both is okay. I think both is welcome. And it's just so interesting that the interpretations can be very, very different. With the same pieces I have, I remember I have one sound piece which does have some words in it also. And some people say, oh, it sounds like the bombing of Dresden. And the other person says, oh yeah, it's a beautiful ecological piece about being in the forest and the bees, and you know. So it's so different what people will see in it, and that's what I actually like about it. And it's wonderful that we have just one piece of poetry and so many worlds opening up with this piece of poetry, or this one sentence, or this one word. It's really creating worlds, you know, in the people.
May I make the next question, Dirk? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to know something about the sound of the language, and I liked very much the first piece you presented with the Finnish yks, 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 whereas the sound with the y and also the consonants with the x. And there's a very similar poem from yourself that you presented on your link, and it was called mu, where you use the same vocal y, and I wondered if you use this sound of the vocal, especially because it gives you the possibility to use more frequencies at the same time. I don't know if you understand me, but there's this technique of voice with overtones, Obertöne. And are you aware when you do this about this kind of sound of the overtones? Do you use vocals because they present this possibility? And on the other side, do you use the language pieces, the basic pieces you use because they have those or other consonants? For example, the x, yxen, x, and it's the same with der nächste bitte, nächste bitte. This is all about the vocals and all about the consonants. How important is this for you?
Yeah, of course it's important. Maybe I do not think too much when I start a thing. It's just coming out as a playing around idea, and but of course when I start to use things, I somehow get aware of the potential that's in there, and of course the U is also very strong in Finnish language, and at that time when I was doing this piece, I was also traveling in Finland a lot, and so maybe I was inspired by that too. But of course, I really love the overtones that are possible with that, and yeah, the overtones are really wonderful possibilities. And but of course, I also like the other sounds, the very damp sounds, and yeah, the harsh sounds and the rhythmic parts. So yeah, you have to use both of them. Of course, with the U, you cannot make a lot of rhythm. But yeah, you can. I wouldn't be able to interpret it. What does it mean? I have no idea. And that
I
was
think
also.
you don't need to interpret anything. I love the best poems I listened to from you have a very poor language, have a very broken. It's a very broken down sentence or words even, but very often they are in the meaning, they are some action for the next please. This is not only a piece of language, but it's an action. Do you look for this function of the sound behind?
I'm not quite sure if I understood the question properly. I'm trying to construct the pieces in a way that that of course that there's always some kind of action required, and but also some pure sound. So these are really two parts of these pieces, and they really create the soundscape, the complete soundscape. Then so you can go on. Because maybe it would be just a little bit boring if you just have one sound continuing all the time. But I can try actually with them. I don't know if Did you hear the Mu poem, The Other People? I can just try it and how it sounds right now. A very short piece. Okay, that was just the beginning, really. If you continue this for a while, really strange things are happening. And sometimes the speakers don't like it, and they make strange sounds. And the technicians, they hate it usually if I do this piece, because they think I will break their speakers. Because it really can get very intense, very loud, and at some point it doesn't sound so nice anymore. And it's just layering this one mu. Of course, it's using the overtones a lot, but I'm not trying to make it too directly to use the overtones. I just try to let them unfold somehow. So that's maybe one of the ideas. I'm not an overtone singer, even though I tried one time. I made a workshop with Sanko Namchilag in Vienna once, and so I tried, but I could see that real overtone singing is something different, and it's really a difficult task. And it's I admire it, but I wouldn't try it actually. And it's actually it's music. It's something different, I would say. This is not music.
That's really, yeah, it's really great to hear, and thank you. And I was just thinking about you telling the Indian school children that Dada is an ancient tradition, and I was just wondering what might be kind of lost or gained in that, because I mean it's interesting in that Dada does offer possibilities for thinking about, you know, very old techniques. And yeah, I mean, what if somebody was listening to something out of Dada and understanding it as ancient, would that actually give any way into, I don't know, aspects of your practice? I think because you're breaking things a lot, but you're also working with a very a very interesting sort of physical response to continuous sound. And yeah, just wondered.
In fact, I like the idea of creating my own tradition in a way, because sometimes I feel a bit lost in the modern world. I'm just a single person, so where do I belong to? Where is my tradition? But luckily, as an artist, you can create your tradition somehow. But it's not only your own creation, but you can also connect to things that have been there before. And of course, if you see some shamanistic practices, you sometimes wonder how nonsensical they are really, how Dada they are. If you ever watch, what is that, the speaking in tongues phenomenon, I think it's wonderful. It's so nonsensical, but so serious at the same time. And I sometimes really thought about this this connection between nonsense and actually religion. So is there some really interesting connection of that? And to have these, well, you, Felipe, you did these mantra pieces also, and I suppose they were not meant to be performed in the church, but so they're rather kind of a nonsense tradition. I don't know. Would you say this is also nonsense, or is there some holy nonsense maybe?
Well, there's a tradition of, at least in Christianism, but also in Zen Buddhism, for example, of this idea of not knowing as a higher way of knowing. There's this beautiful book in the English tradition, of course. Our English and Welsh friends know more about it. This book, The Cloud of Unknowing. I think it's like 14th century, something like that, and it's so and it's about this idea that you can achieve a higher knowledge only when you leave behind the intelligence, other times the senses, or you can go into other kind of senses, the spiritual senses, like a spiritual ear and a spiritual eye, etc. So it's very beautiful to think it on those relationships, and I agree with what you've been talking now about this idea that something very experimental or very fragmented, broken, and all that can be at the same time related to very old traditions. I mean, and that's one of the biggest possibilities, I think, of experimental poetry in general. I mean, it's easier to connect the kind of things that you do, for example, with all the traditions that some mainstream poetry that maybe it's easier in a way, but also it's more, it depends more on the context, maybe, in a not interesting way, of course. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, and I mean, I also wonder about this question of what is poetry and what isn't poetry, and like, you know, is that a poem? Like, actually, isn't there also like a huge advantage in something not being a poem or not being perceived as poetry? You know, when you're going into lots of different contexts. I mean, sometimes the idea that it is poetry will is a barrier, at least, you know, in the context I'm in. Often it is. What do you think? Is it desirable for something to be understood as a poem?
I've thought so for a while, but now I rather see it as an advantage to call myself a poet, because people will still think it's something great, and they don't know what it is, but it's something important, and so it's rather fun to go to a gallery or to a music event and say, okay, I'm just reading a couple of poems to you, and then do this weird sound stuff, and so people will say, oh, this is poetry? Well, interesting. And of course, on the other hand, if I'm at a poetry festival, I would maybe do something which is really, really different from regular poetry, and I would say this is just a sound sculpture, or but that's really the advantage of being an artist. You can call it whatever you want, and it's really great to be in this. How would you call it? Is it intermedia space? And very often people tell me they can't really put it where does it belong? Is it poetry? Is it music? Is it something else? But I just like this place in between there, and sometimes I go a little more to the one side, sometimes to the other side. Yeah, so it gives you a lot of freedom, and I think maybe that's also that also connects to the idea of not knowing, because not knowing things also gives you a lot of freedom, because the more you know, the more restricted your thoughts are, actually, in many ways. And I must say that this is really this is art to me, or poetry. And of course, I really love science, and I think it's very important. And I think there is some scientific truth. But as an artist or as a poet, you can do something completely different. And I know a couple of years ago, it was very, very popular that everyone in the poetry scene, the art scene, everywhere, they all wanted to be like scientists, or they had some connection to science. And I said, why? I don't want it. I don't want to be a scientist. I want to be the complete opposite of a scientist. Other people can be a scientist. They are trained for it. I'm not trained for it. So maybe let them do it. And of course,
what is the opposite of science? What is the opposite side of science? You say the anti-science. What is the other counterpoint, the counterpoint?
Yeah, I think the poetry is for me a little bit the opposite of science. Of course, this is just a very personal idea, but I would say it's very far from the scientific way of perceiving the world.
Louder, sorry, it was perfect talking louder as well.
No, I just wanted to know, hi. Your opinion.
Yo, science. You are poetry.
Science is poetry. Poetry is science.
No. Actually, I really don't care that much about these categories. I don't think it's really interesting. I for long time I was fighting for poetry, non-poetry, arts, music, whatever. In the meantime, I don't care that much. Also science, I don't know. I think what we do is in a way also science, because science is researching and we do research. Also Dirk does research. It's, yeah, and I don't know. Maybe it is science. Because science sometimes also, I know there's this Austrian quantum physicist who researches quantum physics, and he talks a lot with artists because the things he researches are so hard to understand and so weird in a way that he doesn't know how to understand them totally, like on a more meta way. So he invites artists to help him understand what they are doing and what the consequences are. So I think science is, in some fields, it's got so complicated that they also maybe might be happy about artists, I don't know, writing poetry about quantum physics. And I think that could help science, and science influences us, of course, because what we use when we use all this electronic and non-electronic equipment, we use science and we research what can be done with that. So, end of opinion.
Yeah, and same in the in the older times, we call it like natural physical, the philosophy of nature in a way, like science and the study of rhythms. Music and mathematics is the same thing, like numbers and sounds. Then at the same time, when science and poetic belief, like when you follow that kind of objects, like it escape from you, at the same time you repeat some same pattern. What is the connection that you made, like Dirk? Because I love the piece that you showed for Festina Lente in a moment of with the dancer, Mila, no, is the name, the dancer, and that experience was really, really beautiful. You utilize all the space of those caves, and what is the connection that you make between that really conceptual composition and your body and your sex and your soul?
Wow.
That is a really big question. Getting us away from the science poetry discussion, yeah. That was really a lucky thing that I met up with dancer Mila Koistinen, because I don't like to move myself too much, really. I'm standing on stage and move a little bit, but I wouldn't really call it performance in a moving way. So it was great that I could do the sound, and Miller could move about it, and could move to this strange sound. And the interesting thing about it, when I met her at a residency in Finland, she immediately, we shared the rehearsal room. There was a shared rehearsal room, and so I was doing her rehearsals, and she came in and was waiting till I was finished. And then in the meantime, she just immediately started to dance to it because she felt like dancing to it. And so that was really interesting. And she said, nowadays, as a dancer, dancers don't dance anymore. But to the sound poetry, I can dance again. So in the old-fashioned way, in some respect, it's really sharing the room. Laughing.
Understand.
Oh, so silent now.
Yeah. But I would like to recover what Dirk said, and maybe if we can mix our opinions, with, I think might be very different. But besides how we call what we're doing, or even what we think of what we're doing while we are doing, for example, sometimes I think I'm making music or thinking more like a music, but using words, and people might think it's poetry because I use words, but I'm working as a musician. But besides that inner reflections, people are really, sometimes they really need the label. There's like a necessity of knowing what you will see or hear before you go to a performance. Or even I hate, for example, when you buy a book and as a subtitle it says novel or poetry, or I don't care. So what could we do? It's like an imaginary utopian question, but what could we do to get out of those labels, or maybe thinking about different labels, more open, less restrictive? How do you think about that, Dirk or Georg or whoever?
Well, actually, I think I don't really want to get out of these labels too much, because you can use them. Why not use them? And you can use them in a different way than other people use it. But if you completely get out of it and say everything is the same, doesn't matter how you call it, I think it's also a bit strange, Yeah. Yeah, if you don't have any categories, because once you have categories, you can still discuss them. And I think that's quite important, and that's why I always bring up this idiotic question about poetry. What is poetry? But so if you have this term poetry, you can still discuss about it, and if you have the novel, you can discuss it, and of course you can digress from it and do something completely different and call something a novel, which is actually a poem. In fact, my first book I wrote, which is a kind of a novel, I just found in the library in the poetry section. So yeah. So, but that's funny too. But I would rather play with these labels than completely erase them.
And what do you think about it, Jörg?
I feel restricted by these things because, well, I do poetry, of course, also, but I don't only do poetry. So I also do music, visual arts, media arts, whatever. And whenever people, I don't understand people, to be honest, because people want to go to a poetry reading. I don't know why they want to go to a poetry reading. I don't understand. Because when I go somewhere, I want to see interesting stuff and not a poetry reading. Because first, poetry readings are most of the time boring. But I want to go and see something interesting. And one of the best festivals I know, which is unfortunately not existing anymore in Austria, was a festival organized by friends, and they organized a festival. They didn't organize a music festival. They didn't organize a poetry festival. They organized a festival with interesting stuff, and that was a thing I liked, and not going to music festival. It's really boring. I'm not interested in music festivals. I like to see interesting stuff. I like to read interesting stuff. I like to experience interesting stuff. And people are so focused on this novel or poetry or exhibition stuff, and it's so limiting. And I think I'd like to also, when you have to apply for a grant or something, you have to I'm writing a poetry book. No, I'm writing a novel. No, I'm a visual artist. No, fuck all that. I'm not nothing of that.
Yeah, it's very, there's an institutional dimension which is really rigid. I mean, for example, in Chile, there's no funding for literature, but it's called funding for books and reading. So it's the idea that literature is only what's in the books, and it's more related to an industry that, for example, I mean, in Chile, as in a lot of countries of Latin America and Europe, there's a huge tradition of popular poetry, oral poetry, which is fantastic. I mean, I think it's more experimental than a lot of stuff that you see, and a lot of it is improvised, and it has no place, or maybe it has a place like folklore or something like that, which is of course very, very stupid. So yeah, the institution need these restrictions and labels to administrate. And about it, I wanted to know if someone has another opinions about this. It has been one of the most recurrent topics in all our discussion. I like very much to see when there are like different threads in the conversations with the different poets. I don't know if you want to add something, another idea about these discussions. The guys in Barcelona.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to lead this discussion back to the principal point of repetition, because perhaps we might find an answer if we ask what is repeated. Is there sound repeated? Is there language repeated? Is there a message repeated? This might be more important than the question what it is in general. But I would like to lead this discussion back to the point of repetition, which is Dirk's issue. No?
And what would you like to say about it, Dirk? What do we repeat? Because it's not the same, of course, repeating something or other.
Yeah, well, there's so many different answers to that, I would say. Well, one thing that strikes me is that the more technical our civilization gets, the more we rely on repetition functions in our technical equipment very much. But of course, all life is a repetition, all life cycles are repetition. And so I'm not quite sure who was saying that as long as you repeat, you're alive. You know, the idea of living is the idea of repeating, because once you stop a repetition, then you're dead. You know, so it's a basic function of life. So that's one aspect, of course, and the other aspect I want to use is the the exact repetition that is possible with our technical media nowadays, but to use it in a way that creates something which is not exact. I just don't like the idea of being exact in any way. And maybe also that's a difference to scientists. I think scientists want to be exact, and they need to be exact. But I like it not to be exact on things, and because that gives us a more open ideas. And of course, there's different people who thought about repetition, like Gertrude Stein. She was saying repetition is rather insisting, or I think she actually says there is no repetition, it's insisting, you know? So it's always something different, but you insist on the thing. And there's, of course, Derrida, who also talked about the difference and that the changes that you have with every repetition. So there is, even if the repetition is exact, just the time itself will change things, the context and everything. So there's so many perspectives on repetition. And actually, I choose this for my art also because I've thought, especially in poetry and especially in experimental poetry nowadays, repetition has a rather bad reputation as being boring, maybe as being traditional, like rhymes. You know, rhyme is repetition. You know, it doesn't work without repetition. Yeah, so I think a lot of people in the experimental, also music scene, they shy away from too much repetition, and they will make it always have something new, exciting, and new sounds and strange sounds. But the basic repetition and is very boring to some people.
But how you can deal with that kind of contradiction between no exactitude, no exactly things, and repetition? Do you play with that kind of
variation?
Yeah, variation of how do you connect that, you know, that abstract from abstract and going to the concrete. I don't know. Can I explain you, or no? It's too abstract.
I would like to just share with you an oblique strategy by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. Repetition is a form of change. You can repeat and it will be always different. That's nice sentence.
Yeah,
that's very good. And I just see your table there. I wish I could be with you on that table and have a little food with you. Actually, I'm hungry.
We have plenty of beer and other stuff.
We are together.
Yeah, so any other ideas about repetition? I don't know.
How can you deal with that kind of contradiction in like a metrical way between repetition and no research of exact, you know, because repetition by definition, the copy of one.
But it's never the same. Exact copy doesn't exist.
Yeah,
I think.
I would love to listen to Dirk want to say how. On the memory word, you can like complete the rest.
I think our copies are becoming better and better, and it's sometimes very difficult to see the difference. But of course, there's always a difference in the repetition, and
but there are some experiments about
though it's somehow that things develop with the repetition. Pardon?
No, I just wanted to say that there are some experiments in which a word is repeated repeated a lot of time, and the people is not understanding the same, or it changes. It feels like the word is changing, and it's exactly the same. So our perception is maybe it's not so exact, and that's amazing because we as poets. We like performing live on stage, and it means like a space and time, and won't be anytime the same. So this is let's let's say, the struggle between repetition and ephemera or spontaneous. Yeah. And of course, technoplats are also based on repetition, and it's always different.
Yeah, and there's also like the inverse experiment. You can take like a recording of 5 seconds of, I mean, whatever noise you hear in the street, but if you loop it, at the beginning it's just noise and it's just disorder, but after like 10 or 20 counts, it starts to develop a rhythm, an harmony. I mean, the brain is searching for patterns, so it's wonderful when that happens. I mean, and one of your pieces that you show at the beginning, Dirk, the first noise is like very little, but when you hear lots of time, it starts to have like a structure, and at the same time, more repetition, goes into chaos. So, I mean, it's very difficult to measure the kinds of order and disorder in repetition. I think it's and it's very different between different people also.
How do you find repetition works in collaboration? Because, and especially if you're using looping techniques, and yeah, so just how do you think about repetition and interaction with somebody else? How do you formulate that? Yeah, or think about it. Does that change what you think of in terms of repetition?
Yeah, I see it as an advantage because it gives you time, which is great for improvisation if you have time to develop something. If you don't have any ideas yet, so you can just start with a little loop, and then easy to join in. And I find it intriguing to use the loops in collaboration. And for a while, I was a little bit afraid when my friend Brandstifter suggested, "You use a looper? I want to use a looper too." So we have a double loop. Performance. Maybe this is to be sure, but after a while we found out to deal with it and to stop in between and to create a little space, and so I think it's great for collaboration.
Yeah. But then, do you find that you think about repetition then as a kind of, does it become something more like echo and response rather than, you know, in a way, if you're talking about sort of repeating the same thing, you've talked about, you know, living as sort of repeating the same movements, but you know, you can also think about living as a constant adjustment to other people's movements. And wouldn't that actually change what repetition is? And especially in a live situation, it seems to me really interesting and quite complicated, actually.
Not really so complicated as it seems, because so that makes it really flexible to react on specific situations on the audience, and I sometimes loop the audience. That's also happening, or I loop any sounds that will be in the room. So yes. It gives me very simple or very restrictive, but it's not at all.
Yeah,
it's like nothing happens with this. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Joaquin, can you talk louder?
Yeah, there is one thing about the repetition is we should mention trends about it. That means if there is a repetition and we agree that everything is changing, that means it's not static. It's not robotic. That means something is moving. So when it's moving, there is side of it. That means annihilation or stop, silence, or just this movement. And if this movement goes on, then it goes up to a kind of trance, ecstatic, whatever. And what we do about this, and this is my question to you, Dirk. Did you think about this? How do you relate to that? Because it seems to me repetition is bringing this, but there is many, many ways to obtain trances, of course. But is that something important for you?
I'm not quite sure if I understood all the question. Was it about trance? Is it right?
Yes, trance.
Trance. Okay. Yeah.
Important for you or not?
Yeah. Of course, it happens, and I
mean,
just.
it's not only trance; it's the process of something happening. You know, of course, perception and changing, and all the time something is moving on, and this thing could be absolutely called trance into most of the music we know on Earth. I mean, it's a kind of excitation and intensity, and then if we do repetition, it goes this way, or we have to, we try to make it more soft. You know, with techno, repetition was on the same level with a very limited amount of intensity, and sometimes it moves on. That's this thing, you can make that with a simple loop, a voice, and do a trance, or just to, it's the same process. It's just a sound with moving on. So my question was like, is this something you think about? Is that important, this process, or you want something else with the loops? That's what I try to understand.
Actually, I'm really trying out what is possible with the loops, and of course, one of the effects of the loops is this trance effect that people will sometimes have, and I think one time also someone told me it affects the brain waves in a certain way. He was probably a scientist. I don't know about this, but of course it creates a certain mood, and that's also something I think is important, to create a mood with sounds, and to lead people through different kinds of moods, to more intensity, less intensity, and of course, once people are in a trance mood, they start thinking about different things that come through their minds, or they are completely empty. And of course, that's one of the emptiness is maybe one of the things that is important to me. I really love to create a state for myself where I feel really empty on stage. I don't want to think on stage. As soon as I start to think, I'm losing it somehow, and so I always need a little time to get in there, but once I'm in there, after maybe a couple of minutes, I'm really completely blank. My mind is blank, and I don't think about anything at all, and things are just happening somehow. And
it's a kind of meditation. It's a kind of meditation state in your case.
It is, yeah. And people with a religious mind would say this is a spiritual experience to them. And I'm not a spiritual person, but I can understand that people will think that way. And why not? Why not? Of course, I also saw the chanting monks in Tibet and whatever. And yeah, it's a wonderful sound experience too. And I think it's not so far from meditation and trance ideas. And in this respect, it's really going back to tradition again, to shamanism maybe, and where probably all of poetry is based on, or most of poetry.
Yeah, we agree on that, of course. Yeah. That's what I think.
I could go in a church and perform it, and people will still think, oh yeah, he's a spiritual guy, yeah. He sees God in these repetitions. Why not?
Martin is bringing us too much beer. He's in a loop.
This is really hard to watch. You guys are really hard to watch.
I think today we need to do an improv.
I don't have drinks. I don't have food here. No drugs. Nothing. Just
No drug.
No drug.
Everything is a drug. This is like kind of addiction.
Poetry is a drug.
Where
Language is a
You
drug.
got your repetitions. You got your repetitions. You can snort those.
yeah, I try to. I try to smoke them.
It's interesting to think. There's so many thoughts that have occurred to me. Sorry to interrupt, but I can't relay them all. But one thing that it's all very interesting, Dirk and others. Repetition's kind of interesting because, like, in a sense, there's so many kinds of repetition. There's a sound one, then there's word ones, or you can repeat the exact word. You can have repetitions in sound where it's different words. You can have repetitions that in a sense are neither, but they're semantic repetitions or something. Like, one thing that occurred to me, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this poem called 5,000 that someone, I forgot who did it. I think it was some American alt-lit person. And it forms a kind of repetition, and it just goes 1, 2, 3, etc. And basically the audience eventually stops the person. I think it went on to 300 and something at one point. I heard, I don't know, but there's a kind of repetition there, right? Because they're all numbers. And then of course you have like 101, 102. So part of that is a repetition. And then, so there's just all these kind of different repetitions one can do, which is kind of interesting.
And then there is another repetition. No, after when we want to ask some questions. But just like, that kind of new universe backward that they find it in the South Pole. It's a kind of like universe is coming from the neutrinos. And it's not coming from the space, it's coming from the center of the Earth. And it's constructed like a kind of infinite symbol with the Earth and the anti-Earth in a way, that Pythagorean people, they calculate already. And in that moment, all the things that going forwards became backwards. And then you can reconstruct everything, with acoustic systems.
I'm a little bit lost, but I wanted to say hi to Edwin Torres. And maybe your opinion about repetition. You didn't say a word.
Senor, the three of you, muchas. The three of you look like such bad boys in your screen. You're looking for trouble. I can see that right now. And yeah, this is very interesting. I look at repetition in poetry as in language as looking for the next language. Repetition in sound is looking for the next sound. So it's a sense of like understanding where the beyond is by doing it over and over and over and over. And I think that there's something in sound, and it's very chant, very trance, very other, that connects to that sense of finding out where we can go in the audience, in performance, in here, by using repetition, using the sound, the word, whatever it is, continuing. And in the between spaces, I think something happens that we're sort of looking for. That's my approach to it. And I connect that repetition to looking for the other self, the other person who's trying to be beyond here, So that's a very analytical perspective, but the idea of chanting, the idea of this repetition, whether technically, whether just with body, is to become another body, to become the other person, and to find where are we in the listening, where are we in that little area that we're trying to kind of create. So that's where, and it's looping, it's actual taking lines of poetry on a page, repeating them, moving it around. All of that repetition, whatever you define as repetition, is a way to kind of find out where are we in what we're trying to say. That's kind of how, that's the interest in it. And Dirk with the piece, that's the simplicity of that is what makes it resonate and go further. It reminds you, the artist Agnes Martin? So Agnes Martin creates landscapes of just line. There's a lot of minimal reduction art, that's just basically geographic shapes. But to know that what began those shapes for her was landscape, and then you see the actual effect is really interesting. Anyway, so there's ways to kind of take something simple and stretch it so that it's beyond itself, and then we find out, oh, that's where I am, and we would not have gotten there if we didn't repeat, if we didn't understand that we're allowed to keep going and going and going deeper inside, you know. So
that's an interesting aspect, but I think it's also about connecting to other people. It's not just finding the other, but it's also a group phenomenon, you know. You can really connect to a group of people and get them in the same rhythm and the same state of mind, maybe. And that's also a very interesting aspect of this repetition thing, you know. And especially at performances, I experienced that it really happens that people that come from very different backgrounds, they may be scientists, they may be artists, they may be they have very different backgrounds, but for a short while they really connect to the same repetition, to the same beat, or the same word I'm asking, and that's also interesting experience. So
and each one of their same is different, right?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, if you like, I have a little piece for the end.
Yes.
We can do together a repetition piece, and it's a kind of repetition ritual I like to do sometimes at the end of the show, of my shows. I ask people to join in the repetition and the loops, and the easiest way was to just ask for people to say the word repetition, but I make it a little more difficult now. And this is a kind of a decision poem. You have to decide between two words and which word you like. And it's, or the phrase actually, it will be the phrase in theory or in reality. So you have to decide which is the one you want to say. And you can say it in any kind of language, of course. You can say it in Spanish, in Welsh, or whatever languages you have at hand. In theory or in reality are the two phrases. And I will create a basic loop, and I will record you as you come in. And of course, if you're too bored with these two words, you can always do something different, whatever you like. But we'll start with that maybe. I will start with the German phrase, which is in der Theorie und in der Wirklichkeit. And it will go like this. In der Theorie. In der Theorie. In der Theorie. In der Theorie, in Wirklichkeit, in der Theorie, in Wirklichkeit, in Theorie, in Wirklichkeit, in der 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 Theorie, 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 Wirklichkeit, in der Theorie,
In Wirklichkeit.
Theories.
Ooh.
Great.
Woo!
Well, that was a really fun session. I have hardly knowing who is doing what, but I was using my free track looper and
You gotta send us a recording.
Yeah. Martin, where are you? Are you there?
Martin. Fuck off.
Outside.
outside of
We only see the picture of Martin, Gabi.
Miriam Reyes, Carlos Terreon.
Great, Dirk.
Thomas Havlik, are you there?
No.
Yes, but not so. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wasn't able to put the TV on. So the
Oh, yeah. I
view,
was boring.
I don't see myself, but
It's very dark.
yeah, it's very happy to be able to join you again after such a long time. But I'm back in Vienna, and I hope to be able to be with you more often in the future.
Yeah.
Yes, hello Jörg. Hello everybody. Hello Dirk, Martin.
Thomas, what do you think about that connection between repetition and trance?
And silence and science.
Science.
In relation to contemporary thinking.
Poetry, no?
And
Yeah.
quantum physics.
Of course, I'm totally with you. I also see a connection between all this, and I also liked the thing that Dirk said before about not going for some definitions about is this music, is this speaking, is this poetry, or just something else. All we know is that it's some part of the subconsciousness that we've put in ourselves and throw to the audience, and that here, Dirk, you also told us before that you made an gig in front of mental handicapped people, and last week I first came in contact with a very nice young man who's not able to see and to hear and also not speak, that he's and totally kept behind our definitions of language in every way, and the only possibility to get in contact with him was via touching him. So the communication was like dancing a little bit, and this was a great experience that's fresh for me, that fits in the context, because it also pulled myself back into a very raw point of view connected with sound poetry, because every time since ever the body language and to let it happen, what happens with your body also was every time my thing on stage also. And the meeting with this guy who cannot see, he cannot hear, who cannot speak was very archaic and connected me with some kind with elements of myself that only come through on stage in a way, because I'm not a trained dancer or something, but I always tried to put in the appearance some moments where myself, I don't exactly know what's happening next. I'm starting a big monologue, sorry. What was your question, Martin? I'd like to see you. It's great to see you. What?
We talk already about the connection between like flesh, sex, sound, soul, body.
It's all inside there, yes.
And how it connect the the conceptual ideas and the earth, how you say, like telluric sexual force. Then I don't know, maybe Hortense, how do you connect your mysticism with your sex, your body, with the connection with the star, and with your work?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe if I'm sorry, spontaneous. I'm thinking that maybe if you try to connect, you cannot connect. Something like this, because there must be, in my imagination, some part of unconsciousness during connecting, in a way like there is the Absicht, the wanting to, the attention to connect, but not an exactly way to connect. It's like you can, I think, in a way, like you only can try to open the gates, but what floats through comes by itself in a way, and then you need some rescue islands or something like that. And during the performance, where you can jump outside and take a breath and see for a moment where you are before you jump back in again and go farther. I don't know if it's possible to follow me at the moment exactly, but I'm talking monologues. Can you something? Does it mean something for you what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes, of course. I know at the same time, and that is beautiful, because I think sense speaks you in a kind of experience of the knowledge, you know. But when there is no sense, you are free from knowledge in a way. And you arrive at kind of state of unknowledge, reception, or like a microphone speakers, you know, like transform you from reception to transmission. I think that is the ethical of the poem, you know, how you can connect the reception like a microphone and the transmission like a speaker. And at the same time, I just already know about a guy who proposed how to reverse the time with acoustic emissions. I'm joking, saying that I already said. But I just like asked before to Hortense that connection, that how you connect that kind of experience, because in the poetry, that kind of feelings, philosophical thoughts, sex experience, body movements.
Yeah.
Can you tell something? Can you tell us something about it?
No,
Thomas, wait.
Yes. Can you?
It's not for you the question, for Hortense.
Okay.
For who? I don't hear you so good.
There is another people.
Yeah.
I don't really understand your question precisely.
Je l'ai dit en français. C'est comment tu connectes, tu vois, dans ta poésie, les côtés ésotériques avec les côtés érotiques, les côtés mysticisme avec les côtés mythiques, tu vois, tu travailles beaucoup avec ton corps et ton... Hein? Ah? Attends, mais traduire, Joaquin peut me traduire en français. non, mais en fait, ma question après.
Speaking French, I'm saying,
no, I just like asking to Hortense before the question in French. It was the same in English before. But tu comprends la question?
Oui, but with the question of repetition?
Yeah, but how do you connect with that, like, between repetition and trance, the connection between body, soul, spirit, you know, earth, stars, reflex, sex, everything. Because I see in your performance that kind of connection. You work a lot with your body and with your transformance, and also you write a lot.
I think you say a lot of very interesting thing about repetition that I really agree, and just a few words if you want, Martin. I read some books now about comment on peut traduire en anglais le vivant, the question of the life, being life, living thing, and that include animals and plants and etc. All the living on Earth, and I realized a very interesting thing that a French Italian philosopher speak about. It's Emanuele Coscia, and he speak about that we are the repetition of our parents biologically, you know, and that all beings are repetition of other, but repetitions that try to change and to become more and more specific, you know. And I think repetition, it's life. It's you always take the same thing and you repeat it, but you try to change it a little, even unconsciously, you know. And so yeah, repetition is a moving thing. So our body is a repetition of other bodies, and we are all the same, and in this little difference we can make creation, you know. So and I just come back from a big walking. I walked during more of 10 days, and I think the walking is a very beautiful repetition of the same movement, and it's so being in life. So, and we can perhaps make poetry with that.
Yeah, because you know that in that book of Gilles Deleuze, difference and repetition, you know, like
yeah, so it's exactly that.
Say that you do not repeat the same moment, you repeat the space between two moments.
Yeah.
The interval. It's like in sound poetry, you know, it's, at the limit, the music is like the borders of silence, of intervals, of spaces, you know. That,
and in repetition, you have amplification, you know, so you amplify and you intensify the life with repetition. So I think we all share this kind of dynamics.
Yeah, there's a kind of pleasure.
Thomas captured it by saying this is a shout out for connection, because then we can see all sorts of different things that we've seen in repetition, in this desire and into this effort to connect, because repetition can be, as we said, just, you know, repetition of a sound, of something that is familiar. Sometimes this insistence, as you said, sometimes it's just perhaps to make the justice to the word we repeat it. So if we put all of them into efforts to connect, I think that makes a good sense. You know, all of them kind of fits in an effort for achieving some sort of connection. And Thomas, did I get it right? Is that what you said?
I am maybe it sounds a little bit esoteric with this when you speak about connection and everything, but I was thinking the last minute,
connection is trying to connect with
yourself,
deliver a message, not an
yeah, so with the different parts of yourself, like Martin said, with spirit, mind, body, sexuality. So maybe, as stupid as it sounds, maybe also for the artist, it is important to bring out all these pieces, to say in peace, to live in peace with all the different pieces inside of you. And the more you get trainings or ways to do it, to come to inside, to feel inside, to be able to feel the different parts, like I don't know, there's a mystical body that is only for a time being, or an town body, or energetic and musical or a political body or something. The more you find ways to combine all those let's say bodies inside your own spirit body connection, the stronger you will be on stage, and the more safety you will feel when there is a moment when you don't know what's coming next. And this is like mirroring or philosophical or ethical or Zen Buddhist ways of watching into the river of life itself in a way, and maybe leaves the traces of poetry also, but tries to include the life, the living itself, or something like that. Like while I'm speaking about it, I remember that it's been like a characteristicum for all the avant-garde poets since 100 years, in a way, like this cliche of combining life with the arts. But it's also maybe 100 years later more actual than ever, something like that. And then it also becomes political itself in a way, or you don't feel nervous about thinking what does this all mean, what I'm doing, and it gets a sense by itself.
You sound so poetic, Thomas. Actually, I was thinking that there's also the annoying side of repetition, that there is the ugly side of repetition too.
Yeah.
The boring side, you know, the aggressive side of
Sure,
repetition.
yes. The auto and aggressive.
Things that are repeating itself, and we hate them that they repeat.
Yeah, sure.
And we hope history is not repeating. That would be horrible, you know. Yeah, and so we also have to deal with that as artists. I think it's not only the connecting and positive part of repetition.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a lot of people would say that what I'm doing is aggressive. They would say that it's aggressive, and
maybe
they don't like that very much. But I think it's part of the game. You know, it's I don't even feel it's aggressive, but maybe to some people it is. And
but it can also be befreiend if you are able to push through the inner walls of them when they feel it's aggressive. Boys.
Again.
Se siente.
Felipe, presidente.
Ça danse à Barcelone. Dancing in Barcelona. Olé. Olé, 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 olé.
Chao, queridos.
Bye.
Thank you for your spirit, for your rehearsals, and be with us and give you a big hug, like all the family.
Thanks
the sound
so
family.
much.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Thank you. See you next
See you next
time.
Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Good
Dirk.
night. Bye.
So cool.
Ciao.
Your performance very nice.
Thank you.
Salut le boys band
Mhm.
de Barcelone.
See you soon.
See
Bye-bye.
you soon. Bye-bye.
Gaby.
Gaby, silencioso.
Felipe, Miriam, all the people of Vietnam. See you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dirk.
Felipe, creo que tienes que cerrar o algo así, ¿no? Como va el tema.
Felipe, te toca el after, dirigir el after a ti.
Felipe, you are the president.
Of course. Goodbye, all you guys. Now I'm cutting all of you.